Zip ties bit into Colonel Darnell Osei-Wakefield's wrists the moment the security guard twisted his arm behind his back, and the sound that followed, a sharp plastic click in the marble lobby of the Hargrove Grand Hotel, was quiet enough that most guests didn't even look up from their phones. That was the part that would haunt the hotel chain's legal team for years. Not the confrontation. Not the lawsuit. The fact that nobody looked up. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday in late October. Colonel Darnell Osei-Wakefield had driven 4 hours from Fort Bragg to Charlotte, North Carolina, to attend the memorial dinner for Master Sergeant Calvin Pruitt, a soldier who had died of complications from injuries sustained in Kandahar. Pruitt had served under Darnell's command for 6 years. He had been the kind of man who fixed the coffee maker at the FOB without being asked, and who wrote letters home for soldiers who couldn't spell. Darnell had promised Calvin's widow he would be there. He had made that promise at the funeral, and he did not break promises made at funerals. He was not in uniform. He was wearing a charcoal grey wool blazer over a black turtleneck, pressed slacks, and shoes that had been shined that morning out of habit. He carried a leather overnight bag in his left hand, and a garment bag containing his dress blues in his right. He had a reservation. He had confirmed it that morning. He walked to the front desk the way he always walked into rooms, like he already knew the floor plan. The desk clerk, a young man with a name tag that read Bryson, looked up and something shifted in his expression. It was subtle. It was practiced. It was the kind of shift that a lot of people never notice because they have never been on the receiving end of it. "Do you have a reservation?" Bryson asked, though the question came out sounding less like a question and more like a challenge. "Osei-Wakefield," Darnell said. "D. Osei-Wakefield. Confirmed this morning. Room 814. Bryson typed, slowly. Then he frowned at the screen the way people frown when they've already decided what they're going to say and are just waiting for the typing to stop. "I'm not seeing that." Darnell set his bags down. "It was booked through the Department of Defense travel portal. Confirmation number is HGC 771 Alpha. I have it in my email." Bryson looked at him, then at the bags, then at the garment bag, with the faint outline of gold buttons visible through the plastic cover. "The DoD portal sometimes has glitches," Bryson said. "I can put you on a waiting list for tomorrow." "I need the room tonight," Darnell said, keeping his voice level. "I'm attending a memorial dinner in your ballroom in 2 hours." "Sir, I understand, but we're at capacity." "Then why does your website show 3 available rooms right now?" Darnell had already pulled out his phone. Bryson's jaw tightened. He picked up the desk phone and made a quiet call. Darnell didn't move. He had stood in rooms far more hostile than a hotel lobby. He had negotiated in rooms where the wrong sentence could get people killed. He could wait out a desk clerk. What he could not have predicted was the security guard. The man materialized from the side corridor like he had been waiting there the whole time, which, it turned out, he had. He was built like a man who had washed out of somewhere that required fitness and had been bitter about it ever since. His name tag said Rudy. He had close-set eyes and the kind of posture that came from too much authority over too small a space. "Sir," Rudy said, stepping up close enough that Darnell could smell the coffee on his breath, "I'm going to need you to step away from the desk." Darnell turned his head slowly. "I'm a guest. I have a reservation." "We don't have a record of that. I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and exit the premises." The lobby was not empty. There were maybe 15 people within earshot, a family checking in near the elevator bank, 2 businesswomen waiting on the concierge, an older couple sharing a newspaper by the fireplace. Most of them had, by now, found reasons to look in other directions. "I am not leaving," Darnell said. "I have a confirmed reservation and a memorial dinner to attend. If there's been a clerical error, I'm happy to wait while it's corrected." Rudy looked at the garment bag. "What's in that?" Darnell blinked. It was such a strange question that for a moment he thought he had misheard it. "My uniform." Rudy's eyes narrowed. "Your uniform?" "I am a United States Army colonel. That is my dress uniform for the memorial tonight." Rudy reached out and touched the garment bag. He unzipped the top corner without asking, peered inside, and then let out a single low sound that was something between a laugh and a scoff. "That's quite an outfit." It was at that moment that Darnell understood exactly what was happening. Not a clerical error, not a capacity issue. This was a decision that had been made the second he walked through the door, and it had nothing to do with room availability. "I would like to speak to your manager," Darnell said. "I am the head of security." "Then I'd like to speak to the general manager of this hotel. Mr. Kavanaugh is in a meeting." "Then interrupt it." Rudy's face changed. The mask of procedural politeness dropped, and what replaced it was something uglier. The look of a man who had been told no in a way he hadn't been expecting. He grabbed Darnell's right arm at the elbow. "Sir, you need to come with me." Darnell went very still. "Remove your hand." Rudy didn't. He signaled to a second guard who appeared from near the entrance, a younger man who moved fast. Between the two of them, they forced Darnell's arms behind his back. Rudy pulled a zip tie from his belt, the kind used for crowd situations, and cinched it around Darnell's wrists before Darnell could fully process that this was actually happening. "You are making," Darnell said, his voice dropping to the temperature of a climate-controlled server room, "a catastrophic mistake." Rudy pulled him toward the side corridor. "Trespassing," he announced to the lobby, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Disruptive individual. Everything's under control." Nobody protested. Nobody stood up. One man near the elevator actually stepped back to clear the way. Darnell was brought to a small security office behind the kitchen corridor, a windowless room with a folding chair, a monitor bank showing lobby feeds, and a desk with a radio on it. They cut the zip tie, and Rudy informed him that the police had been called and that he would need to wait. Darnell sat down. He looked at his watch. It was 7:03 p.m. The memorial dinner started at 8:08. Calvin Pruitt's widow, a woman named Janelle, had saved him a seat at the family table because she told Darnell that Calvin always talked about him. That Calvin said Colonel Osei-Wakefield was the kind of officer who treated soldiers like people. He was not going to miss that dinner. He asked for his phone. Rudy said it was a security hold. Darnell reached into his blazer pocket and produced a second phone, a matte black device with no visible manufacturer logo and a small red stripe along the spine. "Government issued," Darnell said. "You cannot hold this. It is federal property." Rudy hadn't been trained for this exact situation. That was evident. He stared at the phone for a moment and then, calculating that preventing a colonel from using a government phone was probably above his pay grade, didn't stop him. Darnell made one call. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call his wife, though she was the first person he wanted to call. He dialed the number from memory. It rang twice. "Office of the Inspector General DO," a crisp voice answered. "How can I direct your call?" "This is Colonel Darnell Osei-Wakefield. Identification number Romeo Hotel 4 Kilo. I am being detained without cause at the Hargrove Grand Hotel in Charlotte, North Carolina. I need a duty officer." There was a pause, not the uncertain kind, but the kind that happens when someone is already typing. "Colonel Osei-Wakefield, stand by. We're logging this location. A duty officer will be with you in approximately 45 seconds. Rudy had stopped breathing normally. The duty officer who came on the line had the calm, unhurried voice of someone who dealt with actual emergencies, and therefore treated everything below that threshold with a kind of terrifying efficiency. He took Darnell's statement. He asked for the name of the hotel's parent company, Hargrove Hospitality Group, publicly traded, with 12 government contracts currently active for lodging of DoD personnel traveling on official orders. He asked for the name of the head of security. He asked for the confirmation number of the reservation. Then he said, "Colonel, please keep this line open. This is now a federal property rights matter under Title 42. We're notifying the hotel's corporate counsel." Darnell held the phone against his knee and looked at Rudy. "You should call Mr. Kavanaugh," Darnell said. "Right now, not in a minute. Now." Rudy's hand was already on the radio. Gerald Kavanaugh, the general manager of the Hargrove Grand Charlotte, was a compact man in his mid-50s who had spent 30 years in the hospitality industry and prided himself on being unflappable. He had handled a kitchen fire during a senator's fundraiser. He had handled a minor flood on the 4th floor during a pharmaceutical conference. He had not handled anything like what was currently happening in his security office. He came through the door at 17:19 p.m., saw Darnell sitting calmly with a government phone at his knee and a DoD duty officer on speaker, and his face went through several expressions in quick succession before settling into something resembling controlled terror. "Colonel, Kavanaugh said. Mr. Kavanaugh, Darnell replied. There's been a serious misunderstanding tonight, and I want to personally. Sir, the duty officer's voice came through the phone. This is Captain Merriweather, DOD Inspector General's duty line. I need to verify, is Colonel Osei-Wakefield currently free to leave your security office? Kavanaugh looked at Rudy. Rudy looked at the floor. Yes, Kavanaugh said. Absolutely, yes. And his reservation in room 814, previously denied at your front desk, has that been reinstated? Kavanaugh's jaw worked for a moment. Yes, it has. Thank you, Mr. Kavanaugh. I want to let you know that this incident has been logged and a formal inquiry has been opened into the circumstances of Colonel Osei-Wakefield's detention. Someone from our office will be in contact with Hargrove Hospitality Group's legal team within the hour. Colonel, are you physically uninjured? Minor bruising on my wrists from the zip tie, Darnell said. Nothing that needs attention tonight. Noted. We're flagging this for the DoD Travel Compliance Office as well. Hargrove currently holds active lodging contracts for personnel traveling on official orders. That review will begin Monday. The air in the room changed. Rudy appeared to be trying to make himself smaller than was physically possible. Colonel, Kavanaugh said, his voice now stripped of everything except exhausted sincerity. I cannot tell you how deeply. Mr. Kavanaugh, Darnell said, rising from the folding chair and picking up his overnight bag, which Rudy had left in the corner. I have a memorial dinner to attend for a soldier who died from wounds he got protecting this country. I have exactly 37 minutes to change into my uniform and be in your ballroom. So if you'll excuse me. He walked out of the security office, through the kitchen corridor, and back into the lobby. The same 15 people were more or less still there. The family, by the elevators. The businesswomen. The older couple. This time, people looked up. Bryson, at the front desk, had a new keycard already waiting on the counter. He held it out with both hands. Room 814 looked out over the city lights. Darnell set his bags down on the luggage rack and sat on the edge of the bed for 60 seconds. Not to rest, just to let the adrenaline finish moving through him the way adrenaline does when you've been trained to manage it but haven't quite managed it completely. His hands were steady. They were always steady. They were always steady. But there was a heat behind his eyes that took a minute to cool. He thought about Calvin Pruitt fixing the coffee maker. He thought about Janelle saving him a seat. He dressed in 7 minutes. A dress blue uniform went on differently in a hotel room than it did in a barracks or a quarters. More slowly, more deliberately, because there was nobody else around to notice if he got it wrong. He pinned his ribbons in order. He checked his brass in the mirror. He straightened his shoulders. He went downstairs at 7:56 p.m. The memorial dinner was held in the Hargrove Grand's largest ballroom, a room full of round tables draped in white linen and soldiers of various ranks and ages, most in uniform, some not. There were 3 generals present that night. Darnell was not the highest-ranking officer in the room, and that fact had no relevance to anything. Janelle Pruitt stood when she saw him. She was a small woman in a black dress with a gold brooch that had been Calvin's, and she crossed the room and hugged Darnell the way people hug when words aren't enough. He talked about you all the time, she said into his shoulder. He said you were the only CO who ever asked him what he wanted to do after the army. What did he say? Darnell asked. Open a barbecue place, she said, and laughed the way people laugh at memorials, because the alternative is worse. They ate, and they told stories, and 3 different sergeants gave toasts that made the room go quiet in the good way. Darnell spoke last. He didn't talk about the army. He talked about Calvin putting a sticky note that said good morning on every soldier's helmet one April, during a particularly bad stretch in Kandahar. Nobody had ever figured out how he'd gotten to them all before Reveille. At 10:45 p.m., after the dinner had ended and the room was emptying, Gerald Kavanaugh appeared at the edge of the ballroom. He waited until the last family member had spoken to Darnell before approaching. He was carrying nothing. He had the look of a man who had spent the last 3 hours on the phone with lawyers. Colonel Osei-Wakefield, he said, I owe you an explanation as well as an apology. Darnell waited. Kavanaugh cleared his throat. I reviewed the security footage tonight, Rudy Thompson's personnel file. There are patterns I should have seen earlier. This was not the first incident of this nature at this property. How many others? Darnell asked. Kavanaugh looked at his hands. We've logged 14 complaints in the past 2 years involving guests of color being questioned at the front desk or asked to leave. None of them went as far as tonight. Most people—" He stopped. "Most people didn't have a government phone and a direct line to the IG's office," Darnell said. "Yes. Those 14 people had the same rights I did." "Yes, sir, they did." Darnell looked at Kavanaugh for a long moment. The general manager was not a bad man in the way that Rudy Thompson was. He was something different. A man who had not looked closely at something he should have looked at, and who was now being forced to look at it by circumstances that had grown past the point of comfortable ignorance. "My father stayed at a hotel in this city in 1987, Darnell said. He was a sergeant first class, coming home from Germany. He'd been in the army for 18 years. They told him there was no room. Didn't ask for his ID. Didn't check the system. Just told him there was no room. He picked up his cover from the table. He slept in his car. 67 degrees in October, because he didn't want to cause a scene." Kavanaugh said nothing. "I didn't stay quiet tonight because I'm a colonel," Darnell said. "I stayed quiet because I'm well trained. But I want you to understand something. The version of me that walked through your lobby tonight, and the version that walks through any other lobby next week, are the same person. The 14 guests who came before me were the same person. The rank on my shoulder didn't change what happened to me. It just changed the outcome." He walked out of the ballroom. Behind him, Kavanaugh stood very still. What happened in the weeks after was the kind of institutional reckoning that moves slowly but does not stop. The DoD Inspector General's formal inquiry found that the Hargrove Grand Charlotte had denied lodging to 11 active duty service members in the previous 26 months, all of them personnel of color traveling on official orders. The denials have been logged in the system as reservation errors or capacity issues. They were not capacity issues. Rudy Thompson was terminated within 48 hours of the incident. His personnel file revealed a prior complaint from a guest at another property where he previously worked. A complaint that had been settled quietly and noted with a single line in his record that no one had followed up on when he was hired. Bryson, the desk clerk, was placed on administrative leave pending review. The investigation found he had not acted alone. There were text messages between him and Thompson from earlier that evening, sent after Darnell walked in, that the DoD investigators described in their report as directly relevant to the nature of the denial. Gerald Kavanaugh resigned 6 weeks later. He issued a public statement that used the word accountability 4 times and the word sorry once. The public noticed the ratio. The corporate parent, Hargrove Hospitality Group, faced a suspension of 2 of its 12 active DoD lodging contracts pending compliance review. The financial impact was substantial enough to warrant a disclosure in their next quarterly earnings report. The board replaced 3 members of the Properties Oversight Committee. But the hardest thing, the thing that didn't make the press releases, happened on a Tuesday morning in a federal mediator's office in Charlotte. The 14 guests, the ones whose complaints had been logged as errors, the DoD investigators had tracked down all 14. 12 of them agreed to participate in the mediation. They sat across a table from Hargrove's legal team, not to sue, though some of them could have, but because they had been asked to speak, and most of them had never been asked to speak about it before. A retired staff sergeant named Elton Garner, who had been turned away from the hotel in 2022 while transporting his mother to a specialist appointment, said only, "I assumed I'd done something wrong. I went back to my car and sat there for 20 minutes trying to figure out what I'd done wrong." He had not done anything wrong. The mediator's report noted that sentiment across nearly every participant. The assumption of personal fault. The internalized question. The decision not to make a scene. Darnell was not in that room. He had submitted a written statement and left it there. He had a base to get back to. He had soldiers who needed things from him that no mediator could provide. He found out about Elton Garner's statement later, from the investigator who debriefed him. He read it twice. Then he folded the paper and put it in the same drawer where he kept Calvin Pruitt's memorial program. 3 months after the incident, Hargrove Hospitality Group announced a new mandatory training protocol for all front desk and security personnel at their 42 properties nationwide. The protocol was developed in partnership with the Equal Justice Initiative and included, for the first time in the company's history, an anonymous guest reporting system that bypassed property management entirely. It was named, without fanfare, the Incident Response and Dignity Protocol. Nobody from corporate called it the Osei-Wakefield Protocol. But people who worked on it did, quietly among themselves. Darnell was promoted to Brigadier General 8 months after the Charlotte incident. The promotion had been in process before that October Thursday, but the timing meant that the news landed in a particular way, and several outlets ran the story with the hotel incident as context. He didn't speak to reporters. He had a brief ceremony at Fort Bragg with his family, his wife Camille and his 2 daughters, and a small group of soldiers who had served under him long enough to know when not to ask questions. His daughter Imani, who was 23 and finishing law school, asked him afterward whether he felt vindicated. He thought about it the way he thought about most things, completely, without rushing. Vindication is a personal thing, he said. What happened to me personally was resolved. What I'm more concerned about is Elton Garner sitting in his car for 20 minutes wondering what he did wrong. That's the part that doesn't go away when a hotel chain revises its training manual. Imani was quiet for a moment. So what does go away? Darnell looked out toward the parade ground, where a company of soldiers was running the morning route in the November cold, their breath visible in small white clouds. You keep working, he said. You make it so the next person doesn't have to use the government phone. You make it so rank doesn't determine the outcome. That's the work. He had spent his career understanding that the most dangerous thing about corruption wasn't the loudest version of it. It wasn't Rudy Thompson zip-tying a colonel in a hotel lobby, as shocking as that was. It was Bryson's text message. It was the 14 complaints filed as errors. It was Gerald Kavanaugh not looking closely enough. It was the fact that 12 of the 14 people who'd been turned away had blamed themselves. Those were the structures that needed changing. Those were the rooms that needed to be walked into, not at gunpoint, not with a government phone and a direct line to Washington, but with policy and oversight and the stubborn, unhurried insistence that dignity was not a reward for rank. Rudy Thompson, as of the following spring, was working as a loading dock supervisor at a warehouse outside Charlotte. He had applied for 2 other security positions and been denied both. The hotel incident was a matter of public record now, and his name appeared in the DoD investigator's report. Whether he understood what he had actually done, or whether he believed to the end that he had simply been following procedure, nobody who cared about the answer had access to him anymore. Bryson left the hotel industry. He was 24. Whether that was an ending or a beginning depended entirely on what he chose to do with it. Gerald Kavanaugh taught a hospitality management seminar at a community college the following fall. His students said he spent an unusual amount of time on the section about guest rights. And on Route 77, heading into Charlotte, the Hargrove grounds stood with a new sign near its entrance, part of the company's rebranding initiative. Every guest. Every time. Small gold letters on a dark background. Darnell drove past it once, on his way to a training exercise, and did not stop. He noted it the way he noted most things. Without sentiment, without drama, with the precise, operational awareness of a man who understood that signs were the last thing to change and the first thing to stay the same if nothing else followed. He drove on. The road ahead was clear. Here is what this story is really about. A man who served this country for over 2 decades was zip-tied in a hotel lobby and put in a back room because of the way he looked walking through a door. And the only reason you know his name is because he had a government phone and the presence of mind to use it. 12 other people had the same experience and went home wondering what they did wrong. That is not justice. That is one man's rank intercepting a system that was still running. The rank shouldn't be what determines whether you get to stand at the front desk and be treated like a person. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think about who doesn't have the phone call and what happens to them, hit like. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Echoes of Justice, because there are more stories like this one, and every single one of them deserves to be told. I keep coming back to Elton Garner sitting in his car for 20 minutes trying to figure out what he did wrong. That detail lives in me in a way I didn't expect. Because Elton wasn't weak. He wasn't naive. He was a retired staff sergeant who had served this country and then sat in a parking lot doing what so many of us have been conditioned to do. Turning the injustice inward. Searching ourselves for the error that was never ours to find. What Darnell Osei-Wakefield did differently wasn't just make a phone call. It's that he refused to accept the story that Rudy Thompson was trying to write for him from the moment that lobby shifted. The moment Bryson's fingers slowed on the keyboard and something changed in his eyes. Darnell knew what was happening. And he didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't try to make himself smaller to survive it. That kind of clarity under pressure isn't luck. It's the result of years of building something inside yourself that no one can zip tie behind your back. I think about what it actually takes to stay that calm. Not the performed calm, the kind people put on to look composed, but the real kind, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are when the room decides it doesn't want to see you clearly. Darnell had it because he'd earned it. 30 years of decisions, of showing up with integrity in rooms that weren't always ready for him, of treating soldiers like Calvin Pruitt as people worth asking about their futures. That's not a personality trait. That's a practice. It accumulates, and when the moment came, when Rudy grabbed his arm and the zip tie clicked, all of that accumulation held. The intelligence piece matters too, and I don't mean book intelligence. I mean the kind of clear-eyed thinking that lets you see a situation for exactly what it is without the fog of panic or ego. Darnell didn't escalate. He didn't perform outrage for the lobby. He assessed. He waited for the right moment. He reached for the right tool. That second phoned. The duty officer number dialed from memory. The calm statement of facts delivered while Rudy stood there recalculating everything he thought he knew about the situation. That was not luck either. That was a disciplined mind doing exactly what disciplined minds do under pressure, cutting through to what matters and acting on it precisely. And then there's the part of his character that I find most quietly remarkable. He went to the dinner. After all of it, the zip ties, the security office, the phone call, the DOD logging his coordinates. He changed into his uniform in 7 minutes and walked into that ballroom to sit with Janelle Pruitt and honor Calvin. He didn't let what happened to him become the center of the night. The perseverance wasn't dramatic. It was just complete. I think what this story is really teaching, underneath all the institutional fallout and the contract suspensions and the 14 complaints finally being heard, is that the 3 things that actually protect you in this world aren't rank and they aren't connections. They're the character you've built when nobody was watching. The clarity you've trained yourself to find when everything goes sideways. And the refusal to stop moving toward what matters even when someone has just tried to convince you that you don't belong in the room. Darnell had all 3. And because he did, 12 people who had given up on ever being heard finally got to speak. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect. That's what it looks like when a life lived with integrity meets a moment that required it.